the coaches in different directions, and that way, like, if the person came back, they wouldn't know how to get back to the house to, like, kill the rest of the family. Yeah, the Old South was weird.
Right, but also, I'm pretty sure that a difference of a few inches is not going to stop me from feeling like I can slither into a keyhole. You know? It's like
can you picture just like a really drunk ghost trying to be, where are my keys? Why isn't it working?
Right. Let's just be fair. I've been that drunk ghost where I've been like, why did my key work?
Hanging in the doorway.
Why is it? Wow.
Is this a flashback to Milwaukee? We're going to backpedal a little bit. We're going to go back to Judge Woodruff.
Okay.
He plays a very big part in one of the most famous legends surrounding the Myrtles Plantation. Mm-hmm. And that is the story of Chloe. So Chloe is by far the most famous haunting. Mm-hmm. It's the thing that a lot of people, when they think Myrtles, they think about Chloe. Mm-hmm. And we're not actually 100% sure if she ever actually existed.
Like a lot of ghosts in this era.
But there's so many stories about her and, like, sightings of her. And people kind of feel like because these stories exist, like, it must sort of be based off of something that potentially happened in history.
Right.
The story has been told in different versions quite a few times, so I'm just going to give you two of the more popular versions of Chloe's story. All the stories have this in common. Chloe was a slave, and she worked inside of the plantation. So let's start there, okay?
Okay.
The first iteration of the story, Chloe was George Woodruff's mistress, and she was getting, special affection because she was his mistress. Mm-hmm. And at some point in this version of the story, he is no longer interested in her, and he decides that he wants to break it off. Mm-hmm. And in this version of the story, she gets angry, and she does what she's about to do in revenge. Now, another version of the story, a more popular version, or at least the one that I hear most commonly, is that, she's his mistress, and he's kind of starting to lose interest in her, but she is caught one day eavesdropping on a conversation that he's having privately with another gentleman about family business. Mm-hmm. And he catches Chloe with her ear up to the door, listening in on the conversation. Mm-hmm. Not a good look. He's super duper angry. She's mortified. And as a form of punishment, he cuts off her left ear.
Right. Which is the one that I know.
Yes. So from that point forward, Chloe is really, really embarrassed about her missing ear, and she starts wearing this green sort of head wrap, like a turban type situation, to cover it up.
Right.
And she gets really concerned that he's going to send her out of the house, and she's going to have to work outside with the rest of the slaves and do everything that they're doing. So in an attempt to win back the family's trust and affection, she goes ahead and she makes this special birthday cake.
Of course.
And the other version of the story, she does this out of revenge. Yeah. In this version of the story, she's doing it to win back their affection.
See, and I feel like I've also read one where she made a fairly large feast that was a part of this. But yes, I've heard the birthday one well more, but
Yes. There are, and like I said, there are several iterations of the story, and we're not even sure if Chloe existed or not, But when she made the birthday cake, she had put oleander in it.
I was going to say, added a special ingredient that wasn't love.
It was a special ingredient. Yep. She poisoned it with oleander.
For sure.
And her intention was to make the family very sick so that she could nurse them back to health. And then through nursing them back to health and taking care of them, they would once again like her and she would be in their good graces.
Right.
However, the plan backfires horribly. She puts too much oleander in there. The stuff is absolutely lethal.
Right.
And she ends up killing the two kids. I have also heard a version of the story where they say she killed the wife too.
Yeah.
There's a thing about that. We're going to cover it later. There's a lot of nuance here.
Yeah.
Again, different iterations of the story. At this point, one version tells that after the kids and or maybe the wife die, Judge Woodruff gets super pissed off because he realizes it was Chloe that did it.
Right.
So Judge Woodruff and some other gentlemen, they take Chloe, they bring her out to a tree, and they hang her from the tree. The other version of the story, and also a pretty equally common one to hear, is that Chloe was scared about having killed some of the family members and had confided in some of the other slaves at the plantation about what she had done, hoping that they could help her or maybe offer her some sort of protection. And they were so terrified knowing this information that Woodruff was going to come after them too. So because they were so mad at Chloe, this version of the story says that it was actually the slaves that hung her.
Right.
The Chloe story happening the way that it happens in those versions is probably not real because parish records, when they look back at them and they see the children and the wife's deaths, they all die at different times. And the cause of death indicated is like yellow fever.
Right.
So it kind of puts a kibosh on the whole Chloe theory.
But it was because Chloe was a ghost and she went into the records and was like, gotta hide my tracks. First Munchausen by proxy.
Watch what I'm about to do here. So something that's really interesting is that there's another family that lived at Myrtles, and there's a legend pertaining to how they lost a child. Mm-hmm. It also involves a slave who was then hung.
Of course, because this also, to be fair, is an era where you were like, oh, she did something terrible, or he did, or whoever did something terrible to me with absolutely nothing to back it up, and they're like, it doesn't matter, these people are property.
Terrible. Bad time for everyone. But the Winter family lived at Myrtles, and they had a little girl by the name of Kate who was very sick and dying from yellow fever. And the Winter family called upon a slave from a neighboring plantation who was said to be a healer and a relatively well-known voodoo priestess, or just a practitioner of voodoo. I'm not 100% sure like where the rank lies there, but she was supposed to be like a pretty dope healer. They were all about that life.
Right.
So Dad gets her to come over. Her name's Cleo. Cleo's like, I'm gonna fix this baby girl for you. And she's trying and she's doing all of her things, and she busts out some cool voodoo magic, but it doesn't work. And unfortunately, the little girl, Kate, she ends up dying.
Because yellow fever is dangerous.
Yeah.
Sorry, you keep saying Miss Cleo, Cleo, but all I can think about is Miss Cleo, and I was like,
I know.
Miss Cleo.
I thought the same thing.
I know.
Call me now.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
William Winter, Kate's father, he's very upset. He's super mad at Cleo, basically because she couldn't save Kate's life.
Well, I mean, it's her fault that this all happened, clearly.
So he takes out his anger on her, and he has Cleo hanged.
Because how dare she not cure something that no one could cure, really, at the time.
I know that there are different families. There's some time between the Woodruffs and the Winters. Like, the Sterlings lived there between the two families. But I think it's interesting that there's these stories about children dying, and you know, there being a slave involved, and then the kids die, they hang the slave, and then the names are similar to Chloe and Cleo.
Right. But I feel like we also see that a lot in these cases where it's almost just a repetition of the same story with different players in it. Depending on what people choose to believe about it, whether or not there's actually evidence to back it up. Or maybe someone misheard it. You know what I mean? It's just evolution of stories, obviously, and like hauntings and stuff like that oftentimes do have some sort of cyclical properties.
Yeah. And I mean, like I said, with so many versions of things out there and floating around and nothing really being able to have like concrete proof.
True.
You know, I could see where things would maybe get mixed up.
Right.
Now, William Winter, though, the father, he plays a pretty big part in a haunting at Myrtles Plantation. So he was actually murdered not too long after Kate's death. He had heard somebody calling him from out front, and he walks to the front door, opens it up, somebody shoots him square in the chest.
Wow.
So he's bleeding out, you know, he's been shot in the fucking chest, and he's like hobbling and crawling, and he starts climbing up the stairs to his wife. He makes it to the 17th step, where he dies in her arms. Now, one of the things that people report happening to them or around them when they're at the plantation is thumping on the steps like somebody is either stomping or dragging themselves up them.
Right.
And it always stops once it gets
To the 17th step.
to the 17th step. That's right.
See, now I'm wondering, too, because of a lot of theories, and now I don't know, because I don't think I've ever read anything about this, but if there's a cold spot on that step as well.
I have heard that. I've heard something about there being a cold spot there.
Okay, which would make sense from what we kind of know about that.
So here's another interesting piece of information about Chloe. Back in 1992, there was a photograph taken of the plantation, and in the breezeway between where the butler's pantry is and the mansion, you can see what appears to be the apparition of a slave girl.
Okay.
And she is transparent. You can see the siding of the house through her. Uh-huh. And National Geographic actually used the photo in like a tiny documentary type situation that they had done, which featured the plantation.
Okay.
And it was thought to be Cleo.
Now, is it something that you, as someone who does photography things, if you were to look at it, would you assume it's like a double exposure? You said 1997?
It was 1992.
1992, pardon me.
So the photos were being intentionally taken for insurance purposes. Mm-hmm. And the person who was taking the photos, you know, they had no intention of trying to capture a ghost or anything.
Totally.
But yeah, I think it might have actually been the owner was taking the photos. But they went ahead, and because they like wanted to have like postcards made with this photo on there and get some sort of like patent situation happening,
right,
they had somebody look into the photo to see how credible it was. Obviously, you're never really going to be able to prove whether or not it's a real apparition in the photo, but the person who examined it looked at like the shadow density and also checked the proportions of the apparition to make sure that compared to everything around it and then the size of the head and the limbs, that it made sense.
Wasn't somehow just placed there.
Yeah, it wasn't just like composited into the photo or double exposed or something.
Right,
absolutely. Right. Which, I mean, you could still double expose and get correct proportions, but... you know, but the person who looked at it seemed to think that it was genuine. And like I said, people have claimed to see Chloe walking the grounds of the plantation, and there has been a little bit of debate over whether or not it's Chloe or Cleo walking the grounds of the plantation. But most people, when they report it, they see her walking with the head wrap on. I don't see why they can't both be there. I think they're both there. In that room where Kate died of yellow fever.
I'm so sorry. All I keep thinking is sharing is caring. and then you're like, I think they're both there.
So in that room where Kate died of yellow fever, it's been reported that the bed in that room will lift off the ground.
Those are always my favorite.
Around and just shake about violently. And there are so many, like, deep, really fucked up, jagged scratches all over the floor under the feet of the bed from where the bed has shaken around so much.
Uh-huh.
And they've been there for a super, super long time. And more and more of them keep appearing.
What have they justified that with? Yellow fever does not make you super strong, and moving bed and scratching floorboards strong.
We may never know.
That sounds like demon stuff.
I could see, given the fact that it was a plantation, there being some angry, pissed off energy there.
I mean, yep.
But obviously, you know, Ghost Adventures went here because they go everywhere.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm a little bit nervous to ever say that my house is haunted too loudly because I'm worried that they're just going to show up.
And when they were interviewing somebody who had spent the night in that room, and I don't remember, like, if he worked there or if he had just visited. I didn't watch the whole thing, to be totally honest. But I guess the dude had spent the night in that room, and the bed was shaking really violently, and he actually thought it was like an earthquake.
Right.
And he was like, what's going on? And then he looked up at the ceiling and noticed that the light fixture was not moving at all.
Yeah, nothing was moving except for him.
It was just the bed moving. Another sort of haunting story about the house is that there's like this haunted mirror. The story says that if you take a photo of the mirror, you'll see handprints in it from the other side of it, or apparitions of people.
Right. Even after it's just been cleaned.
Yeah. And the mirror, you know, from what I understand, it's been re-silvered, but there are still parts of it where, like, it's becoming, like, de-silvered. Mm-hmm. And the people that work there, like, they'll even tell you, like, I mean, you know, like, it's not always 100% clean, but then, like, there are parts of the mirror that, just like I said, like, it's becoming de-silvered over time. Yeah. So, like, your eyes do this thing when they want to see something called matrixing, where, like, you can put together an apparition if you want it to be there badly enough.
Right. I mean, your brain wants to do whatever it wants to do. That's why we have
well, and also
people
with,
that
like,
fully believe things that are not true.
Yeah. And, like, with weird patches and stuff, like, I mean, that can totally look like something funky in your photo. So the Myrtles Plantation, it is a bed and breakfast.